Hi, welcome back to SQL Server 2016 Administration. This is the Advanced Security and Administration module, and this section is on extended events. In this video, we'll look at extended event options. In this video, we want to describe the different options that are available for our extended event sessions and learn how to set these with Management Studio and T-SQL. Extended event sessions include a lot of different options. I can't cover them all in detail, but I'll try to give you a general overview. Now, these options can certainly affect which events are captured as well as the impact on the session, the actual instance itself, so you want to be careful here. Extended events is designed to be very lightweight, but if you configure your sessions to capture too much information, you could use more resources than you expect. Be also aware that while you can always view the properties of your session, there are times you can't change options while the session is running. Let's talk about the global session options. Now, there's a few options that we want to configure. Probably the main one is, do we want the session to begin when the instance starts? Certainly there are some sessions that we may want to begin, such as something that captures auditing information. But troubleshooting sessions, we may want to not have begin when the instance starts and only start those when we need to. We can also decide if our sessions will include causality tracking, which tries to track the activity of a session across many different events so that you can determine some causality for what's going on from a particular user. We can certainly set options for event loss and dispatch latency, which occur or determine how we send that data on. And then we have some various other memory options, which we'll look at in the demo. Now, each event has a set of fields that are always captured for the event, and this is called the default payload. The session always gets most of these, though some are optional, but because they're always captured for a particular event, they have very, very low resource requirements. And so, in general, we want to use these events as much as possible. However, we can add more. Predicates will determine which conditions we actually capture data. So, when an event is fired, predicates are the Boolean logic and or that looks at the various parameters we've set to decide if that event is going to be captured. Now, these predicates are specific to each event, not the global session. So the more events you capture and the more that you try to include a predicate for, the more complex your session can be. If the predicates for an action evaluate true, then additional fields can be captured. Now, this is not the default payload. These are additional fields, and this data has to be captured synchronously. So you want to be careful about capturing too much data, or certainly large data fields, because there's a lot of overhead from gathering this data. So let's look at a demo and see how these options can be set. Here I am back in Management Studio and I've got my packed session here. And I've got this session properties already pulled up here. And so you'll notice on the first general tab, we have some of the options. So do I want to start this on server startup? Certainly after session creation, I can do that, though we've already done that. And then I can watch live data in the screen if that's being captured. Typically wouldn't do that. So I can choose this if I want to. Let's choose this so it'll change and we'll see this T-SQL. Now, causality tracking is already checked, so we'll leave that alone. Then I'm going to jump down to this advanced section and look at some of the other global options that we can set. So the first few relate to the retention mode and moving data around. So single event loss is the default and it's recommended. In this case, when SQL Server gets busy and the buffers start to fill up in memory, a single event can be dropped. This is kind of a balance between keeping events information around and not impacting the server. If I choose multiple event loss, then when the buffers fill in a busy system, I could drop lots of events. And we try not to do this, though this is certainly the least impactful to the SQL Server performance. If I choose no event loss, then everything must be processed, and if need be, the system will slow down to ensure that all events are captured. As it notes, this is typically not recommended for busy systems. Let's leave this at single event loss. Now, my dispatch latency in seconds determines how long I capture information in buffers before I send it out to one of my targets. This is the default, it's 30 seconds. You can certainly change that. One thing to be aware of, if you say 0, this is the same as unlimited, so we try not to do that. If you need data captured more often, please lower this, but be careful because this does have an impact on your server performance. Now we look at memory size. Now, the max memory size is the amount of memory that we want to allocate from the system for extended events. Certainly you can choose what you want to allocate here, but keep in mind everything you allocate here can't be used for the buffer pool or for other information. Max event size is if we think there's single events that could exceed the size of max memory, we can add some additional items here. Now, this can't be larger than max memory size, but I can certainly set this to something that would ensure that I would capture other information. One thing to note, when I do set this, SQL Server will actually revert twice this information for this max event size as well as the max memory for extended events. So in this case, I would have 4 megabytes plus 1, which would be 6 megabytes total. Lastly, this memory partition mode determines how the buffers are allocated around. Is it per NUMA node? Is it per CPU? Or is it just for the system itself? As I've mentioned in previous videos, I could certainly click OK here, but typically we want to hit script so that we can see what these options do. So let's take a look at those. Now, like with anything else, this has got first class DDL, so we alter the event session on my server. I've changed some things, so it's dropping some events here, and then it's set the retention mode as single event, dispatch latency is set there, my max event size is set to 1 meg, my startup state is set to on. So those items actually changed. And then I have these other actions and items that are on here as well. I think just previous information I've had in here. But let's go back and look at those options again. The other part I want to talk about in the event section. Now by default, when I look at this, I see all the events available in SQL Server. And if I flip through here, you'll see that items pop in these event fields. This is the default payload that occurs. So if I wanted to get something like, let's see, what's a good one? If we said that we are doing a cursor recompile, what's captured? Nothing is by default. For data masking, I get this information. Is it a regular statement? Is it from the in-memory hackathon areas or something else? Is it a privileged user? This is the information I kind of get for free with one of these item fires. And you can see as I flip through here, there's different things that are captured. Now, if I hit this configure button, I see the selected events that this particular session is capturing. So for example, I can look at login, and then I have these options on the right. Now, these are slightly backward to me because the default fields are the items that are being captured. So for login, I get this item. You'll notice that database name and options text are in fact checkbox, so I can choose to not capture this information. But by default, my event data will include all this information. Once I choose these, I have the option to do something else. So let me come back to something like batch completed. Now I get a bunch of items in here. The filter predicate is often where I may set something. So for example, I may look here and say, let's look at CPU time. And let's say that is greater than 600 milliseconds. We want to capture this event, right? That's only for this batch completed event. And certainly I could do something else, like say if the duration is in fact greater than, let's say 5 seconds, right? So 3000 milliseconds. Then we want to capture this. So both of these would have to be true. You'll notice I have CPU and duration there. So I have 2 of these items. Now that's only for my batch completed event. If I go back to my login event, there are no predicates here. So if I want to make a complicated session, I have to set each one of these individually to make sure I know it's there. Now this UI doesn't make this easy, but we'll see this T-SQL in a moment. The last thing is global fields. Now these are the actions. So if the event fields are captured from the event, the predicate has to be evaluated to be true, then I can now capture additional information. And you'll see here that I have other items that I can capture. So for example, I could create a mini dump, which I would almost never recommend, but maybe I want the query hash. Maybe I want just the process ID or the plan handle. Maybe I want something else that's in here, such as the T-SQL stack, which could be a lot of information. Any of these that I add have to be processed synchronously. And so these items have to take place on the server once the event's fired, and this takes time and resources. So this can slow down the system somewhat. Let's script these out and see what we have and pop back. So now we see we've got on here, we've done a few things, and you'll notice that my action here is grabbing some information here, and I'm grabbing different items that are there that are going to be a part of this event. So in this case, when I'm changing this, I'm saying, for this batch SQL event, actually it's for the batch completed event, which is over here on this end. This is formatted a little bit funny. I'm going to get this information where the CPU time duration have to be true. So there's my predicate that has to happen. So if I pop this out to make this a little bit easier to see, and this is a different event. Here was that predicate we added where we said for SQL batch completed, these actions are in there for this predicate firing. And in here, you'll notice we added the T-SQL stack, which wasn't there before. Now we have to specify everything that's in there each time. That's important for us to do. So you can see that this session has a lot of redundancy in here that you may have to add. It is often easier to set the session up with the GUI, but you certainly want to save this code in case you ever need to recreate this event. That's an overview of the options. As with the other extended events items, this is more complicated than I could present here. So please dig in and learn a bit more about it if you plan on using extended events. In our next video, we'll take a look at how we can view and analyze extended event data.